paulistano, mas sou filho de baiano. Minha mãe vinha, na época, trabalhar como costureira, trabalhar em fábrica. Meu pai veio trabalhar em obra. Logo quando eu nasci, meu pai começou a trabalhar como zelador. Estudei sempre em escola pública. Desde pequeno, até por os meus pais serem preocupados em me prover educação, eu lembro muito da minha mãe falando: Bruno, você é muito estudioso, tal, mas faculdade a gente não vai conseguir pagar pra você. E aí vi o INSPER. Aí logo vi, putz, é privada e é caro. E acho que não vai dar. E acabou que tinha uma abinha lá no website. Programa de bolsa. Eu falei, opa. Liguei pro meu pai. Falei, pai, passei no vestibular. Ele chegou aqui, ele viu tudo isso. A primeira reação foi, será que é aqui mesmo? É isso, não é possível. Não, é aqui, ó, olha o nome, INSPER. Nossa, é mesmo, é aqui. E aí outra coisa que marcou foi o meu pai falando: aproveite essa oportunidade que a vida tá te dando, porque isso daqui não é pra qualquer um, cara. Eu aproveitei cada palestra, aula, monitoria, evento, tudo que tinha eu queria estar. Entrei aqui com a mentalidade, consegui fazer uma graduação, primeiro da família, e tá ótimo, porque o que o INSPER me ensinou é que não, sempre é possível querer mais. Sonho voltar pro INSPER, não apenas como professor, como pesquisador, mas tá no dia a dia, tá ajudando o fundo de bolsas a captar recurso, entrevistas para vestibular.
É capaz de tudo. Se ele quiser ser astronauta um dia, ele vai ser.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning to all of our distinguished viewers this beautiful September morning. I welcome you very much to this August event. So today we're going to be talking on a very interesting topic and one that's very close to my heart. Straddling, the both jurisdictions that we're examining today, Brazil-African trade. I think for a bit of background, Brazil-African trade has actually increased substantially in the past 20 years, but many challenges remain, associated with challenges like, limited communications, logistical difficulties, bureaucracy, and lack of transparency. There remains, even though there's a substantial amount of trade going on, a lot of possibilities, a lot of avenues still remain to be explored. And one of the hope we have from this webinar today is to facilitate the relevant actions through discussions we'll be having, increase interest, from both sides of the Atlantic in fostering a closer approximation of the both jurisdictions. I think before I go on, it's up for me at this point to just briefly call upon, our professor from INSPA to give a brief introduction from our host. INSPA is hosting the event today. Just to give a brief introduction from our host before I then introduce our guest speakers and, begin with the webinar webinar properly. Thank you very much. Monica, off to you.
Hello there. Good morning. Good afternoon already. Welcome to INSPA, and I will share with you a very short presentation about what we do and who we are. Can you all see my screen? Can you hear me and see my screen?
You're quite clear. Go ahead.
Okay, so INSPA is an institute for research and learning that we, just a minute, I'm going to. Okay, we are a non-profit organization, an institution of higher learning and research, and we we reinvest all of our original results in the achievement of our mission. That is being a center of reference in education and knowledge generation, right? And in the fields of we work and being recognized as such. And actually, INSPA started as an institution of economics, finance, and business administration in 1987. At the time, it had another name, but it focused particularly in finance, and evolved to INSPA in around the 2000s, and we focused very much specific in business administration and economics. Today, we have undergraduate programs in law, business administration, economics, and 3 types of engineering. And our idea is to provide foundations for to expand the vision of society, expand our influence and our impact, and also to education in a very social and way. So we have 6,067 students in the undergraduate program. This was in 2019. Then 7,000 students in executive education programs, more than 20,000 alumni, and we offer 263 full scholarships to our undergraduate program. So this includes housing and board, and also housing board, and it's for students who come from all over Brazil and who are unable to commit to the financial tuition that is necessary. We have inside INSPA, we have 30 organizations, student organizations, and we have more than 90 international partnerships. And all our funding comes from private donations. So we don't have public money, and all is all reverted into the goals and the mission of our institution. We have been recognized and by the Triple Crown of accreditations. I just want to know that less than 1% of the business schools around the world are receive the Triple Crown. That is basically the accreditation from AACSB, that is the American Collegiate School of Business. EQUIS, that is a European one, and AMBA, that is the MBA Association, International MBA Association. And in Latin America, I think there is only, as far as I knew, only 7 institutions that have the triple accreditation. And our portfolio includes, as I mentioned before, the undergraduate programs, the 7 undergraduate programs, several graduate programs in Lato Sensu and executive education, And these programs go from public policy to health management, to business project management in general. And then we have graduate programs that are the strict sensus programs that are like a PhD in economics and business economics, and several masters in different in professional masters in and lato sensu, other lato sensu programs. I think this for this we have already mentioned, so I will not go on. I will just to mention that we have students from all over the world in our classrooms, particularly students in the senior students from international schools, and that are integrated in our ranking and file. I think that's it. Just to reinforce our graduate program. I don't want to extend too much because I don't want to take time from the focus of our presentation. So good luck to everybody, and have a good presentation.
Thank you very much, Monica, for that brilliant presentation on INSPA. So INSPA is one of the top, academic institutions in Sao Paulo. And for today, INSPA is the host of today's event. The event is currently being organized by INSPA, the INSPA Business School, by the Lagos Business School, and by the Afro Chamber of Commerce. From the Afro Chamber of Commerce, I'll be anchoring the event. I'm your humble moderator today. While from the LBS, we have Professor Harry Okuba, who is one of our panelists. I'll give a brief introduction of our guest speakers today before I then call upon our guest speakers, to facilitate the discussion that we'll be having. So I will start with, our distinguished honorable ambassador today, Professor Muhammad Ahmed McAfee. So Honorable Ambassador McAfee was born in McAfee, Kaduna State in Nigeria. He's Nigeria's ambassador to Brazil. He's an academic. He holds an MSc, a PhD in agricultural economics, as well as an MSc in banking and finance. He was appointed by the Nigerian president, His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, as Nigeria's principal representative to the Federal Republic of Brazil in July 2020. He assumed his office at the Nigerian Embassy in Brazil in June 2021. Professor McAfee, as an academic, is a professor, and he has worked as a research fellow at the Institute of Agricultural Research, the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, in Nigeria. He has written several publications in international and local journals, and he has commissioned several technical reports over the years. Ambassador Ahmad M. McAfee also has a wide range of managerial experience covering areas of banking and finance with national and international banks, as well as with the Bayero University Microfinance Bank. Equally, as a faculty member, he has served in many university, faculty, and departmental committees, like the Standing Committee of Congregational Member of Household Products, the Director of Bayero University of Microfinance Bank. He has also served as the Director of the Agribusiness Incubator Center of the Federal University of Dush Microfinance Bank, who are the Federal University of Dush. He's a member, or he was also a member of the Research and Department Standing Committee of the National Research Foundation. Ambassador Professor McAfee is actively involved in politics in Nigeria at different levels. Our next speaker, Professor McAfee, Your Excellency, I welcome you this morning, and thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you. Our next speaker, Professor Pihanis, Monica Pihanis. Monica holds a PhD in Economic Development and Public Policy from MIT Cambridge, Massachusetts, the USA. She's a two-time alumnus of MIT. She holds a PhD and a master's degree in city planning, which she obtained in 1998. She also has a master's degree in public administration and government from FGV, which she obtained in 1995. She's a graduate of law from the University of Sao Paulo Catholic University, which her degree she completed in 1987. She has served as a public sector lawyer, and she has also taught at various universities in the US, including the New York University, NYU, in Rutgers University, and she has taught also in Japan and in Canada. She has taught at the Foundation School of Sociology and Politics of Sao Paulo in Brazil. She has also been a fellow of the International Labour Organization, and she has been a consultant to the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is an international organization. She has worked with human rights and electoral staffing in Africa, particularly Mozambique. And and she has various academic publications in her area of expertise. Her areas of interest currently include organizational theories applied to the public sector, new public management and new public administration, state reform, administrative tax reform, public functioning performance and motivation, public sector training, public sector performance indicators, and public finance and public management. Professor Monica, thank you very much for being here with us today. Your CV, which is very impressive, makes you a very brilliant participant for our webinar. Thank you very much. I think so. Then the next person on our next speaker is Natalia Diaz. She's one of my favorite CEOs in Brazil. Actually, Natalia has more than 25 years of experience in investment banking, both in Brazil and the United States. She has an emphasis on capital markets, syndicated loans, project financing, and relationship management. She has served as the CEO of Standard Bank in Brazil since 2018 and as the Director of Energy and Infrastructure at Standard Bank Group for Latin America since 2012. Natalia is a member of Standard Bank International Executive Committee since 2018. She coordinates the financial ecosystem working at the Brazilian chapter of the 30% Club, a global campaign to promote diversity and inclusion at the board level globally. Prior to her career in Standard Bank, Natalia has held different investment banking leadership positions at global financial institutions, including JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, ING Bank, and Banif Investment Bankings. She has served as a coordinator for Real Estate Receivable Certificates Committee at the Brazilian Association of Financial and Capital Market Entities between 2010 and 2015. Natalia has a degree in public administration from FGV and a specialization degree in finance from the Amsterdam Institute of Finance. Natalia is a board member certified by the Foundation Don Cabral, and she's also part of the 5th PDDEC class board diversity program sponsored by B3, IBGC, the IFC, Spencer Stewart, and the WCD. Thank you very much, Natalia, for your time today. We're very thankful. I strongly believe we're going to have very brilliant discussions with you on the experience of African businesses in Brazil. So I'm very thankful for your presence today on the panel. Thank you. Our next participant is Mr. Hugh Mukherjee. Hugh is the president of the Afro Chamber of Commerce. He was born in Angola. He has a bachelor's degree in business administration with a focus on foreign trade, which he obtained from the UMESP. He also has an MBA degree in management and logistics and international operations, which he obtained from the Universidade Municipal de São Caetano do Sul. At the Afro Chamber, Hugh has worked with diverse teams to grow and solidify the presence of Brazilian businesses in Africa and vice versa. Since 2008, he has acted in the CPLP's directory board and finance director and consulting boards. As a trader in Africa, Ru was led to rethink the needs of African nations and how Brazilian companies can profitably contribute products of excellent qualities and competitive prices to the mix of the context. So he has championed the role of the Afro Chamber of Commerce Brazil in Africa, especially in disseminating, the relevant knowledge and prerequisites Brazilian companies would need to specialize in to profitably engage in the African markets. Rui has given various international lectures on the African continent in Angola, in Cape Verde, in Cameroon, in Ethiopia, in Equatorial Guinea, in Canary Islands, in Rwanda, and the list goes on. So Rui is a very, as well as being the president of Afro Chamber of Commerce, he's also a very informed participant. I'm very thankful for his presence on our panel, list of panels today. Thank you very much, Rui. Thank you. Our last panel today, our last but not the least, obviously, is Mr. Correa. Mr. Correa is an accomplished executive and economist with over 10 years of experience. He has a distinguished career in the area of macroeconomics, trade policy and analysis, and development economics. And his career has spanned roles at the Inter-American Development Bank in Brazil, the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office in Brazil, the Canadian Foreign Affairs Trade and Development Office in Brazil, Apex Brazil, which is a Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, the World Economic Forum at Geneva, Switzerland, and the Brazilian African Institute in Brazil. He is currently the senior economist for Mozambique at the African Development Bank Group. His current focus includes originating, structuring, and implementing government-led projects and public-private partnerships. Mr. Correa has a master's in advanced leadership, a master's in economics, and a bachelor's degree in economics. The last of the two of them, which he obtained from the Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. So also, Mr. Correa is a very distinguished invitee on our panel today, and we're very thankful to have him on board the panel today. So after our introductions, I'll be calling upon Your Excellency, the Nigerian Ambassador, to give a brief introduction on the level of trade and political relationship between Brazil and Africa. Like we all know, trade follows political relationships. Between Africa and Brazil over the last 20 years, there's been an increase, level of political rapprochement, and it has manifested in the trading relationship between both countries. For example, between Nigeria, which your Honorable Excellency is the ambassador for, and Brazil, and between the year 2000 and 2010, we saw an over 500% increase in trading relationship between the countries, and this was as a result of the very targeted, political rapprochement measures that were implemented by the Brazilian administration at the time. So if Your Excellency can just, as well as give a welcome address to our participants from Africa. I've been informed that we have a lot of participants from different African countries and our participants from Brazil. And if Your Excellency can just give a brief overview of the nature of political relationships that exist between Brazil and Africa. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. The floor is over to you. Your Excellency, I think you're mute, so you have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies. Let me start with the most senior persons, which of respectable personalities like Professor Monica, Professor Talia, and Harry is there, and Hugh Mukherjee, my fellow presenters. Let me welcome you on this stage. Of course, I recognize the major organizational capacities of Bob Marley from the inception of INSPIRE, and of course the organization of INSPIRE. I extend my sincere greetings and appreciation for inviting me to participate, at least deliver a welcome address during this session. May I also extend our sincere appreciation for all our listeners across the globe, especially Africans around the globe who have tuned in to listen to some of the discussions we're going to have, particularly with respects to relationships between Africa and Brazil specifically, looking at the two divides of the Atlantic Ocean, and seeing what has transpired over the years, and perhaps look at some of the challenges those transactions have met, and then what efforts have been done by stakeholders to overcome some of these challenges, and probably look at what would be prepared the way forward for further improvement in relations, politically, economically, and in all other fields. I know every one of us here is armed to the teeth to give us share information about some of the organizations he has made over the period. But suffice is to say now that, like Bob had remarked, there has been significant improvement in the levels of activities between the two continents. One can see, for instance, since 1980, if you were to analyze it, prior to the oil glut in Nigeria, for instance, we had a remarkable level of business, but that has never exceeded more than $50 million US in real terms, which climbed up to 1999. We're still up to 1993 actually. It remained very low. But from 1993, 1994, through to 1990 and up to 2000, the volumes have been improving. In fact, you have over 300, 400% increase in terms of activities, both export and imports, among particularly South America and Africa in general. What prompted these, of course, are very clear. From the parts of South America, there has been improvement in the levels of technology. From net importers of food, they became net exporters within a record time because of changes in the structures of technology and improvements in the management of resources, particularly agricultural production, science and technology involvement, or employment of technology in the improvement of the productive capacities of producers, industrialists across the country. If you can single out one important milestone, is the achievement of improvement in agriculture, for instance. A state alone, Porto Alegre, produces over 70% of rice that Brazil is producing, and has always have a net export. From 1990 up 93, 95, and 96, if you look at the surplus they generated and the export potential they created, it is enormous. And these are very encouraging developments, which the African continent needs as much more than they're getting. The willingness of the Brazilian government to share with Africa some of these science and technology products, and seemingly has also become very evident, given what they have been able to establish in Ghana and across in some other few African countries. And they have been exploring other possibilities of creating avenues and centers where this technology can be disseminated with cooperation of the host governments. This is a very encouraging development. And if this trend continues, I believe that the steps they have taken to overcome the challenges of food shortage and food security across the world significantly improve. I can cite one specific example, for instance, recently, they have gone into partnership and collaboration with the Nigerian government to produce and export under a very tailored agreement tractors, accessories, service centers, creation of service centers, and technology-based instruments, which have greatly facilitated employment of a number of young men and women to embrace agricultural technology when hitherto they'll be running away from it. This is critically very important for both Africa and Brazil. In Africa, it is very important because lots and lots of youth are still there. If you look at the structure of the population in Africa, let me just cite one case which is very familiar, the case of Nigeria. Over 40 million youth, probably more than that as at now, within the ages of 18 and 35. We have over 40 million youth who are currently not not engaged in terms of, I won't call them unemployed fully, but yet are not optimally employed because they have not been pursuing any serious career in their lives. This is a potential time bomb. But with the introduction of such technologies and the agreement of the Brazilian government to share some of these technologies, a lot of this will improve because a lot of them will take after agriculture as a major occupation, either at the stage of production or processing or value addition or marketing. If each of these is to happen across the country, because there is a proposal for over 800 centers across Nigeria in different states and different political zones. These are significant milestones, which I believe would improve in encouraging the two countries to do more business with themselves. Now, before we delve into the specific figures, it is useful to see that there are some challenges that have been made. There are natural challenges amongst barriers to improved activity between the two continents, Africa and South America, signified or represented by Brazil. If you look at it, the language barrier is still very, very relevant. We still have many French-speaking countries, English-speaking countries, Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa. And whereas in Brazil, I think officially the Portuguese language is the supreme. And this has limited ability to work together, to communicate with each other, and to improve valuable participation of the individual dots that exist across Africa or across the divide. Both in Brazil and in Africa, lots of private and public institutions are interested in doing business with themselves. But what this barrier of language is preventing or is slowing down the process of integration. The second barrier, of course, is the physical separation. We have a continent out there, which ideally, if there are direct links between Africa and South America, it's a matter of 4 or 5 hours by air, maybe a number of 1 or 2 days by sea. But today we take 20 up to 25 hours to get from Nigeria to Sao Paulo in Brazil. And I'll have to go through either Europe or through the Middle East or others. This is a serious limitation. If you look at proximity of Europe, the Far East, the Middle East, and so forth, to Africa. And the opportunities that exist in Brazil, if you use the ANU, certainly Africans perhaps would have opted for coming to South America than going to some other locations. This has limited the ability of the people to mix up. There's the other aspect of culture. Even if you have technology, science and technology, and then you want to interact with people, you need to know their culture, their sensibilities, their respect for certain things. And in that way, you'll be able to integrate them and engage them properly in more sustainable fashion. That will continue. So these are some of the challenges. There are also tariff barriers. Tariff barriers will include issues that take taxes, import quotas. I remember the last visit I made to Podagro. I was in Santa Maria. I remember some of the issues raised. Initially, Nigeria was importing a lot of rice, and suddenly we stopped because Nigeria has now taken a decision to start to grow its own rice. And for that reason, they are affected. This happens also across the globe. You see the other exporting countries like Thailand and the rest of them. But nobody will certainly think that Nigeria will take to find the measures so quickly. So quotas, taxes, restrictions on imports, custom tariffs and so forth, all these can go a long way in reducing the ability of nations to do business among themselves. The restrictions can be looked at from both sides. That why the exporter wants to make some money, the importer has the need to protect our industries. Maybe the reasons for that, we can look at it differently from different perspectives. But when we have some agreement, either bilateral or multilateral, and it's being respected, most of these things can be addressed. I'm not coming to the solutions, but the other thing is the incentives. A number of countries across Africa have been given incentives to producers, either to protect local industries or farmers or whatever. These incentives also are quite okay. They are very healthy for their own economies, but for the overall interest of the global economy, maybe that needs to be fine-tuned in order to address limitations in trading among nations. And this is getting more prominent in the conduct of business between South America and Africa. Lastly, there are non-tariff barriers, which are also constituting a problem in the smooth running of transactions between Africa and South America. Next is the opportunities. Given all these challenges, but we still have a way forward. There are so many opportunities bound there. In Africa, for instance, look, if you can find that there's a large population, and most of the population in Africa are youth within the age graphics of 18 to 40 years. They're all young. We have constituted the largest segment of youth in the world. Take away China, of course, and others, but Africa is the next out of it. And then we have lots of natural resources that have been unexploited. They're just waiting to be exploited. The opportunities are boundless. The opportunities and most governments are welcoming investors from all over the world. Every country you go, Ghana and Nigeria, you find the government are already willing to suspend so many things in favor of investors coming from outside. They are willing to partner with you. They are willing to support you, to provide land, the ease of doing business has significantly improved, and the infrastructure is also growing at a fast rate. These are attractions which can make business grow. In addition, you find that with abundant raw materials that abound in Africa, the need for partnership with countries like in South America, particularly Brazil, are very enormous. Because, Brazil possesses the capacity, the science and technology for production, for security matters, for producing aircraft, for transportation systems. Every one of them, they are well ahead. Whether you like it or not, already Brazil is in the first leg of nations across the world, and they're able to sustain this for many years. The way the economy is managed is very encouraging. So there are opportunities for doing business with Africa, which both sides of the divide will desire to create or to sustain or to expand, as the case may be, depending upon the level where you are. In Nigeria particularly, I know that in specific areas, for instance, in agriculture and science and technology and in security, we have so many things to do with Brazil. And that shapes the direction of the discussions of bilateral agreements that goes between Africa, or Nigeria specifically, and Brazil. And so far, except for the COVID setback recently, enormous milestone would have been achieved given the security challenges we face in Africa, in most of Sahara area, West Africa, south of Sahara, and in particular Mali, Nigeria, Ghana, and the rest of these countries. Each of these suffers some kind of security challenge, and has been replicated across Central Africa and parts of East Africa. These are obvious challenges for which I think working together with Brazil will enhance security and the overall well-being. You remember that all these countries, most of them, the majority of them are in the South-South, and that's why we don't have any nuclear reactor out there. It's a very peaceful region. And it is very interesting also to know that that's the only place that we can freely sail. You don't have any fears of a bomb being set off. So it's a very peaceful region, and that we aim every effort to bring about more transactions between southern parts of the hemisphere should be encouraged at large. We have also one important development that I think I need to draw our attention to, and that is in terms of opportunity. Over the years, the trading pattern across the globe is tailored towards improving capacities of individuals. That is capacity building, training and training. That is a knowledge asymmetry in terms of access to knowledge amongst the populace. Whilst Brazil has gone very far in many areas, a lot of parts of Africa are still behind in those terms. A lot of efforts also have been done by international organizations and other countries to support mass education, which is critical to any scientific breakthrough in technology. Research and development can take place, but it's only after you educate the people that you can pursue this more vigorously, and they can see the sense in investing in education. That opportunity is there. And there are opportunities here, and that's one of the questions I wanted to ask Mrs. Monica, Dr. Monica last time. That I wonder in her institution whether the medium of communication remains only Portuguese or also have an English component to it. Because most of the institutions here in Brazil stick to Portuguese language alone, unlike the French, for instance, who create even French alliances in countries like Nigeria, Ghana, wherever Anglophone countries or English-speaking countries are. The French would try to create something that will allow students of that particular host country to gain access to knowledge about French and French culture. And that has helped in cementing the relationship between French and many other countries around the Francophone regions of Africa. And that has tremendously improved communications. It has improved trading. It has improved in many In many instances, it has been a way of making things happen. And that, I see that being emulated by Brazil, if it wants to enhance more communication and the transmission of knowledge across Africa, across Africa. And that will pave a way for improved relationship and efficient running of businesses amongst them. I am humbled, to say the least, that the long-standing diplomatic and trade relations between our countries and Brazil, which date back to 1960, is a golden opportunity that's provided for our private sector companies and indeed public institutions to even explore business opportunities in Brazil, and the same thing for Brazilians in Nigeria. And most of business people and former captains of industry that I met in the cities I visited have indicated their willingness to work with Nigeria, to work with Africa. And they have specific interests in very many areas. And the diplomatic strain is so encouraging because everywhere you are welcome. That we should be properly exploited. We should explore this to the end. And next is the resources in Africa are very cheap. The labor is very cheap. These are very cheap. And you can produce at a very low rate. And Brazil can enter the European market through Africa. They can set up places and produce goods and services and serve the European countries because of the proximity and because of cheapness of labor, availability of raw materials, availability of that. Working together with the Africans will enhance this opportunity because we want the whole world to enjoy the benefits of low production, low cost of production, and cheap goods and services across the globe. We also look at the membership of the African Union and the other endorsements of African Continental Trade Agency, which has already recently agreed to go into, it has agreed to facilitate faster transaction between Brazilian countries, Brazil and African countries, and to expand businesses across Africa. That should also be exploited. There are many other avenues between South-South cooperation between Africa and Brazil and South America as a whole, which have been entered into by governments and by international organizations. This can help us to ease this situation. I may make some recommendations in this regard and see that I'm very happy to report here that recently there has been efforts to resuscitate these routes, direct flights and maritime connections between Africa and Brazil. A number of companies have come up recently. I think some Africans have bought a large number of aircrafts from Brazil and other South African countries, and they are setting up resuscitating these routes. If this comes into fruition, this will greatly improve communications and trade and business that have been entered. The language barrier is now being addressed. I think we have made enough points. In Nigeria, I think we have set up a number of institutions, universities have set up departments and units, which they hope will introduce subjects, languages like Portuguese, French in their curricula, so that they can enhance understanding of their neighbors. And that will improve communications and partnerships among both West Africans, French-speaking, Portuguese-speaking, and English-speaking countries in Africa, and the same thing with Brazil. There's also the price of competitiveness, occasioned by a largely relatively strong rise. The real currency in Brazil is very strong compared to African units of exchange. That is, the money in Africa, most of them are not as strong as the real. So that is an advantage that Brazil, the superiority it has. And because of that, which makes things cheaper in Africa, opportunity is there for a lot of exports from Africa. This figure has not been rising significantly, only in very upper-grade material, those that can offer crude oil. But there are many other areas Brazil can accommodate some of these natural, resources or raw materials that it uses and broaden the sources of its raw materials so it can also produce cheap. I think that we'll be able to improve on. I can also recommend that in terms of information asymmetry, a lot of our people are not aware of the opportunities that abound in Brazil. And the same thing with Brazilians, they know very little about what happens in Africa. And that limits, as I said earlier, our ability to do business with each other. This I'm rounding up. All
right, perfect. Thank you, Excellency. Yeah,
if this asymmetry is addressed, I am sure creating avenues for chambers of commerce of various countries to extend and discuss with each other, other private sector captains and operators to come together, the information inflow across the globe, or some kind of innovation that we can introduce, like INSPA, which we can spare. It's an effort to see we can have a platform where information can be exchanged alongside what is being offered at the embassies. The embassies can find avenues of creating more and more participants on the platforms so that information can easily flow on where you can get what kind of services in Africa or where we can get from Brazil. Africans everywhere can log in and find out the opportunities to which kind of places offer what, and eventually can be able to do to conclude transactions in that scale. So finally, I will implore us to exploit these opportunities, look at them carefully, and see how we can come in to facilitate faster and improve growth between the two continents as far as we could very seriously. Thank you so much for the little audience. I have not been able to share everything, but I will stop at this moment. I know some questions and answers will come. So maybe we shall flesh up whatever we have missed and the gray areas that we have left behind. Thank you for the opportunity once again.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Really a very comprehensive talk there. Thank you so much. You really talked a lot of things. I think for me, some of the things I could get from what Your Excellency presented was, some of the constraints that, currently applied and that impact between, the further appropriate of Brazil-African relationships include things like lack of knowledge of the rights of Africa, lack of good infrastructure, specifically between the two regions. So, for example, Your Excellency mentioned the time it takes to convey people and goods from Africa to Brazil. And also somewhat shaky institutional infrastructures that exist in both regions, Africa and Brazil. And Your Excellency has mentioned how, increased cooperation can ameliorate these things. I think a point that really struck me from all Your Excellency said was how the opportunities are in the challenges, right? Brazil and Africa share, a significant cultural and historical relationships, and both regions can utilize this to advance their macroeconomic and other situations. And this has happened before. So, for example, like you rightly mentioned, between 2000 and 2010, there was a lot of, African-Brazil relationship that really, impacted the trading relationships of the both countries. But I think we will get back to all of these points, if the opportunity arises in the question and answer session. I see Mr. Mukherjee is ready to go for his question. So I'll just, quickly jump to him there. So, Mr. Mukherjee, my question to you is this, right? The Afro-Brazilian Chamber of Commerce, Sao Paulo is the prime African-Brazil trade organization in Brazil, and it's responsible for coordinating the relationships between Latin American and African businesses and civil societies. Now, as the president, you're aware of the statistics, you're aware of the nature of relationships that the organization has, coordinated over a significant period of time, right? So I'm wondering if you can share some light on the historical trend, right, of cross-regional business and knowledge exchange partnerships between African and Brazilian companies. So, for example, say maybe the past 20 years. My question is this: have we witnessed an increase or decline? And in your opinion, what might be behind this, trend, be it an increase or a decline between the two regions? In the light of everything His Excellency had mentioned, in the light of the relationship that exists between the both regions. Thank you.
Thank you, all the audience, and thank you, His Excellency Ambassador Ahmad McCarthy. It was a pleasure to hear about you and the environment in Nigeria. Nigeria, as I used to say here, is a huge country and very representative in Africa. And with the example of Nigeria, we can move on and our strategy to promote Brazilian companies in Africa. And I think you said everything. I have one brief presentation about the chamber. because the last time I was in Brasilia, here in the capital of the Brazil, I didn't have the possibility to meet you because of the pandemic. We are located here in São Paulo, but I heard about your visit here in São Paulo, and I think you are very active to promote Nigeria and also Africa, and I'm very thankful for the government of Nigeria to put someone like you, because you have the knowledge to share with us. And I also thank INSPER for the invitation to participate in this event by Professor Monica Pihanis. Is very interesting to promote. And you, Bob, as in charge to promote this event. My brother Romulo Correa of African Development Bank, because we have a partnership with the African Development Bank promoted by Dr. Rafael. So the Brazilian people and the African Development Bank, I think this is a great opportunity for Brazilian companies to do more in Africa. Natalia Diaz, CEO of the Standard Bank and our associate in the chamber, we are learning a lot with Natalia and all the team of the Standard Bank Brazil. And thank you also Mr. Henry Onokuba. He's very interesting. I think this joint, this link, the INSPER and the Lagos Business School is very interesting. I think the first step to make more about this trade relation. I will share my presentation here. Is very short presentation. I think in 5 minutes I will do it. Let me put here. Okay, I think everything is seen. This is the Afro-Brazilian Chamber of Commerce. This is the new brand of the chamber. When in our brand we want to unify not only the North Africa but the Sub-Saharan Africa where we are located. And for me, as the first president of the Afro-Brazilian Chamber of Commerce, an African, is the first time that Afro Chamber is led by an African from Angola. It's very interesting to have this challenge to make more for our continent. And we have this. It's very interesting that this is a phrase we used to share with the possibility associates in the chamber. If you talk, is Nelson Mandela talk. He says, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. So I think Brazil and Africa, we have this kind of behavior with heart, aging with heart. And so we can connect by all the structures we have. So here we have another numbers of Africa populations. We have 1.5 billion of inhabitants. It's very interesting because the other thing I will talk, one of the points, what Ambassador Mukherjee showing us is the technology. We are more than 1 billion of cell phones in the continent. I think this to insurance, to education, to a business, it will be better because we know technology is all. We are founded almost 50 years ago. Next year we will make 50 years. So all are invited to participate with us in the great party we will make to celebrate the chamber. This is about our history. We are founded by Mr. Adalberto Camargo. He's an African descendant, and his goal is to approximate more African and Brazilian companies and make it true trade. So our vision is connect people, establish productive relationships, and so generate economic results through integration between Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. I think Ambassador Ahmad told us about this. We are similar opportunities, we have similar challenges, and we can share. I think Brazil can share more with African countries this environment. Our vision is to be the Chamber of Commerce that promotes the passion for Africa and its economic integration with the world. This is very important because if you don't have passion to make business, there is nothing. And in Africa is very interesting, including these times of pandemic, is very hard because Africa want to make business, but they want to see on eyes of the people, the other part, not only to make by virtual meetings and things like that, but it's one of the tools we have. And the last one is our values. I am because we are. This is an African phrase, and we are ethical, responsible partners, accurate, and punctual. Going ahead, I have some about our service. The first one is dissemination of knowledge about Africa. We do it with webinars, with trade missions, and because it's very interesting for companies in Brazil to know our realities in Africa. This is very difficult to share with these companies or these people only talking about the continent. It is very interesting to go there and to see. And the other service we can resume and expanding access to the continent market. So we have a lot of information. And as you told me, Bob, about the trade balance we see. And last year, more than 3.6 million of Brazil imports from Africa and 7.8 exports to Africa. We see in the trade balance, it's very interesting to Brazil to make business with the continent. But we have a lot of countries in the most, they are making business with Brazil is Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt. I think this is the main partners of Brazil, but we have many other countries. So for my part is this the brief introduction about what Afro Chamber is, and it is very interesting to share this knowledge we have with the community of business here in Brazil, and also to the education institution like INSPER and Lagos Business School. So thank you, Bob. Thank you all for the time.
Thank you very much, Hugh, for that very somewhat deep insight into what the Afro Chamber does. Because one of my questions to you would have been, the follow-up question would have been, so what support institutions exist in Brazil, that can facilitate this increased rapprochement that we're hoping to stir by virtue of this webinar. But I guess you've already answered that. You've already made the point, with your very detailed presentation. So something I think right now, after this, talk about the fact of interest, the fact of the shared culture, shared history, what President Ignacio Lula da Silva termed as emotional debt Brazil owes to Africa. I mean, after all of this we've mentioned, I think the next thing we want to possibly talk about is what the experiences of African companies in Brazil are, and and what what ventures or what partnership, what possibilities of partnerships can exist. Brazilian technologies is very transferable to Africa by virtue of the geological similarities, the somewhat similar trajectory of development Brazil has had compared to a lot of African societies. So this present the possibility of a multiplicity of rapprochement. So I would love to go to CEO Natal Diaz. You're the CEO of an African entity in Brazil, so you've got first-hand experience in this issue. So I'm wondering, so first of all, I apologize for quoting Tom Jobin, but he's one of my favorites, right? He said Brazil is not for beginners. So in your opinion, right, Brazil is pretty complex. It's got its own challenges, institutions, structures. But I'm thinking, in your opinion, what can be the experience of African, entities in Brazil? One. Then secondly, what avenues of partnerships exist, in terms of the burgeoning realities, both in Brazil and Africa, can facilitate this increased rapprochement we're trying to, espouse by today's conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And go ahead, Rui.
Yeah, please, Natalia.
Okay. No, well, first of all, thank you so much, Inspire University, for the invitation, and also Afro Chamber for facilitating my joining in this panel. I would like also to greet my fellow colleagues in this panel. It's truly an honor for me just to join and to share the screen with such knowledgeable people on the African relations and on the African experience. It's really a pleasure for me. Let me just go a few steps back, Bob, before answering your question. I think that just for the benefit of the audience, I would like just to introduce very briefly Standard Bank, and also perhaps spend a few minutes of my speech in sort of providing more information about Africa and why do I think that actually the relations between Brazil and Africa are underestimated, and there is a huge potential that we need to realize in the medium term. So first of all, Standard Bank is the largest bank in the African continent. We are headquartered in South Africa, and we have a presence in 20 sub-Saharan countries. We are the largest institution by assets with $150 billion in assets, and also in market capitalization. We are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And outside Africa, we do have a presence in the largest financial centers, including Europe, the US, Brazil, the United Arab Emirates, and China, in order to connect large multinationals that come from these regions and want to do business with Africa. And I always tend to start my speech whenever I'm invited to join a panel about Africa, is just to try to give an updated picture of Africa, if I may say, to the audience. And specifically here in Brazil, I think that there is a lot of misconception about what is the Africa of the 21st century. So I think that Rui has shared one important slide with some numbers, and I would like to just do a quick deep dive on the key trends that are shaping the future of Africa, and why I think that we should be take a closer look into the potential of the business between Brazil and Africa. And first of all, I think that most of the audience don't know that Africa is the fastest growing region in the world after Asia. Actually, the GDP growth in Africa, and I think Romulo will cover this in much better detail than I, Africa has grown in the last 20 years at an average rate of 4.36%, which is much higher than the world average, which is below 3%, and it's much higher than the Latin American average. Other factors that are helping Africa to catch up in terms of economic development are not only the investment rate, so Africa right now invests on average 23% of GDP, and there are countries that invest more. And of course, there are other institutional reforms that have been adopted by certain African countries, the likes of Ghana, Botswana, and many others, that actually is helping to put Africa in the right direction of growth. Of course, COVID has changed this. So it's the first time in 50 years that we saw recession in Africa. But again, I think that the important message is that even though the short term has changed, the long-term fundamentals of Africa and why we believe that Africa is the next frontier for growth in the world have not changed. And Standard Bank has a series of reports that we have issued back in 2010, and we reissued them in 2019, just highlighting what are the key trends that are shaping the future of Africa. And these trends are, generally speaking, 5. The first one being demographics. So Africa is home to almost 1 billion people. By 2050, this is going to be 2 billion people. So Africa is going to be home home to 24% of the entire population on the globe. In the next 20 years, for every 2 people that are born, 1 is going to be born in Africa. So this is creating a massive consumption market and has been attracting investment from different multinationals, specifically on the consumer space, that are looking into that. Not only that, Africa population is extremely young, as the ambassador has mentioned. So the average age is 19 years old, which partially explains how COVID has not impacted so dramatically from a health perspective the continent so far. The second biggest trend that is happening there, and more important, not only the size of the population is growing, but consumer spending is growing at a faster pace compared to the populational growth, which means that actually the GDP per capita is increasing, and this is creating a massive consumption market in the continent. The second one is urbanization. So Africa is the region of the world that is adding more people to cities compared to the entire world. And this is also kind of contributing not only for the population to have an access in terms, or having a desire to access different products and services, but also creating these big consumption centers. Another key trend that is really important is digitalization. Also, we have now almost 600 million people with mobile access in Africa, and this has come only 20 years ago from, 19 million, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a huge penetration in terms of internet access. And this has been changing entire industries like the financial services, where we are seeing more and more fintechs actually kind of occupying some spaces in Africa. The second one is financial deepening. Of course, we are seeing more and more people having access to financial services, and there is a strong correlation between access to financial services and the type of products and services that you demand. And very important, the political stability and smooth democratic transitions like that we have seen in Nigeria very recently. We still have a few conflicts, but they are very much concentrated on the center of Africa, on the Saharan space, rather than being generally spread out. I have to say that the risk perception of Africa is greater than actually what happens. We have 20 countries that are better ranked in the ease of doing business compared to Brazil in Africa, and the likes of South Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, and many others. So this is really important for us just to have a different picture. And Africa is opening itself to the world. So if we take the numbers in terms of trade has grown from 300 billion in the beginning of the year 2000 to almost $1 trillion right now. And of course, with the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, we expect not only intra-trade to grow, but also Africa to occupy certain spaces in the global supply chains, specifically as many countries try to avoid the dependence on China supplies for many industries. So, and this is related to the agenda of Africa, which is really to increase intra-African trade, but also to increase the industrialization of the continent. And last but not least, in terms of foreign direct investment, we have seen a surge, specifically on the initially on the natural resources segment, but also this kind of spreading out to infrastructure. And I have to say that in that regard, Brazil is also lagging behind. Only China has invested over the past 20 years $153 billion in Africa in different projects. And the number that comes from Brazil is less than 10% of that. I think that there are other trends that we need to be aware of, which is also that was touched upon by Mr. His Excellency, the Ambassador McCarthy, which relates to the agribusiness. If there is one potential angle of cooperation between Brazil and Africa, this has to be agriculture. Not only because agriculture is represents the bulk of the exports from Brazil into Africa. We primarily export poultry and sugar to Africa, and a little bit of agric machines, but also because Africa imports more than 40 billion worth of food per year. There is a growing population and the need to feed that population, but also because Africa is close to the consumption markets in Asia. And if we look that most of the continent is located in a tropical area, this presents a lot of opportunity for Brazil, not only to export more in the beginning, but also to start investing to develop the production in the continent, looking also in the medium term to protect market share in the global agribusiness, because Africa is going to be the future of agribusiness. So with that new picture, I think that perhaps, and I hope that we'll have more time on the Q&A questions to discuss what are the potential angles for cooperation between Brazil and Africa? And Bob asked me what is my experience in sort of receiving African companies in Brazil. I have to say that basically there is, as I mentioned, limited amount of foreign direct investment and trade between the two regions. And when this happens, I think that it's more likely to be the other way around. So basically, Brazilian companies investing in Africa rather than opposite. We have seen in the past lots of South African companies, specifically on the consumer segment, on the pharmaceutical, and on the media segment, looking for markets in Brazil. But this is not the general rule. I think also because the Brazilian economy is more diversified and perhaps a few steps ahead of Africa in terms of the development of the economy, I think that the direction is rather on the opposite way. This does not mean, and going back to Bob's initial remarks, Brazil is not for beginners, Africa is not for beginners, but we do understand each other. And that's why I think that we need to collaborate and to cooperate more, because the challenge that Brazilian companies face here in Brazil are probably the ones that they are going to, that Africa faces. And also there is a lot of track record and experience and expertise that we can export and share in the continent. And that's why I think if we look at the levels of trade and investment between the two regions, these are really underestimated. And if I had to choose, on the other hand, one country to select and to say, well, there should be more engagement between Brazil and Nigeria would definitely be my first pick. I understand and share the concerns in terms of the language, but if you think that Nigeria is often the largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa, it really depends on the price of the oil, but it's, if not the first, it's the second after South Africa. And there is a very healthy competition between the two countries. There is huge potential for Brazil, not only because of the cultural heritage that we share, but also because the types of solutions that are developed by Brazilian companies, they are suitable to Africa. There is, I think that the size of the population, the stages of development, because we are all emerging economies, we tend to develop solutions that can be easily applied to Africa if we compare to import technology or products from developed markets. Not to mention that if we compare the foreign relations between Brazil or other developed nations, I think that the US has been very protective in terms of not sharing technology. I think Europeans, they share the burden of the colonialism, which sometimes prevent them from having a more friendly, let's say, relationship with Africa. China has been growing and has been very supportive of the African countries. But there is also some questions regarding the applicability of certain technologies there. In Brazil, we have historical, very strong ties with the continent. We were the first country to recognize the independence of Angola, for instance. And we have always shared mutual interests in different areas, being cooperation in agriculture, in defense, and in other fields. So for me, it should be a no-brainer why Brazil should be looking and sitting more often on the table with the key policymakers in Africa to try to discuss how we can improve and foster business among our regions. One of the ways to do that, and just to connect a little bit with the topic of this seminar, which is connecting the dots, would be for us to have a clear discussion around what are the trade agreements that we need to put ahead in order to increase the exchange of merchandise. I think that the ones that we have currently in place, they tend not to be too comprehensive, and they work better with the North of Africa rather than with Sub-Saharan Africa. And now with the AfCFTA, we need to take this opportunity to discuss how we can be doing more. And of course, there is a lot of space for us to cooperate in different fields, like post-COVID. Brazil is producing the vaccines that Africa needs. So is there any discussions for Brazil to supply vaccines to the continent? There are other industries like auto and auto parts. South Africa is a big market for the automotive industry, and we do have spare capacity here. So shall we be supplying more auto and auto parts? And not to mention, of course, agriculture, that there is full potential on the whole ecosystem, being from the development of technology and application and the transfer of technology from Brazil to the production of grains, sugar, and protein. So with that, I think that I'm a firm believer that we should be talking more, and that's why forums like this one is so important, to put together people with different backgrounds so that we can kind of have this open conversation and try to think and identify potential ways for greater cooperations on the two sides of the Atlantic. So I will stop here, not to monopolize the speech, but I'll be more than glad to take questions and to go into any of the specific subjects in greater details on the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Natalia. You're doing a very brilliant talk, part of which informs my preference for you as top CEOs in Brazil, right? But I think you mentioned very important points, right? One of them that really struck me is how Africa and Brazil share similar developmental trajectories. Obviously Brazil is more advanced than this, but that means that Brazilian companies have a footprint of development or thriving in what might be termed difficult terrains. And these experiences can be easily or somewhat, less difficultly transplanted to an African context. And in the face of that kind of reality, right, it kind of begs the question why there's not an increased rapprochement by African and Brazilian companies in that space, right? I guess I was really struck by that because, for example, challenges that can exist in Brazil can refer to the large size of Brazil, and the logistical differences that can apply in that regard. The somewhat not very clear regulatory infrastructure and the deficits that exist there. What can be termed the custo do Brazil, or the cost of doing business in Brazil, which our African audience may not exactly understand, but it's just, I guess, difficulties that apply in terms of the business ecosystem, the economic variability, the what can be termed, problematic infrastructures. All of these are problems Brazilian companies have dealt with, right? And the problems a lot of African societies face. So they can really transplant that knowledge expertise, or that knowledge repository, to advance, their business footprint in African countries beyond what can be termed the legacy areas of mining, infrastructure, and energy. So thank you very much, Natalia, for your discussion. Very brilliant, very insightful. Thank you very much. So we're grateful. Right. So Homola, I'll move to you. Right. You're from the AfDB. You're working with a major financial institution in Africa, right? In the course of preparing for this webinar, I discovered that between the, what I call the golden decade of African-Brazil relationships, 2000 to 2010, a core participant in the furtherance of African-Brazilian trade relationships was the BNDES, the Brazilian Development Bank, essentially, through the provision of export stimulus, through the provision of, the facilitatory knowledge that could help Brazilian companies, operate better in an African context, through those kind of essential support streams. So my question to you is really, can you possibly shed some light on what the AfDB is currently, the African Development Bank Group is currently doing in Africa, right? That can facilitate the abilities of African companies to be more participative in this kind of context we're trying to espouse by virtue of this kind of webinar, increased trading relationships. So what activities is the AfDB currently carrying out in Africa that can strengthen the decision capacity of African companies to more profitably engage with their Brazilian counterparts, to further the betterment of the two regions? Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you to all the other colleagues in the panel. I feel like I'm very privileged to share that space with the others and to be here my Brazilian comrades and the African brothers and sisters. So thank you very much. With that, some greetings from Southern Africa, from sunny Mozambique and the Indian Ocean. I have been here for 2 years, and as a Brazilian in Africa, I have been learning a couple of things. So let's start talking about the African Development Bank. So as you said, the African Development Bank is a leading development financial institution in Africa. All African countries are member countries of the bank. And we also have external members of the bank as well from other parts of the country that support us in developing what we would like to bring into Africa. I think the 5 most important areas that we are working at, and this translates not just with our work with the government, but mostly with the private sector. Right now, in fact, we actually believe that development of Africa will pass through the full development of the private sector, are our agenda, which is called the high fives. So high fives are, the first high five is Feed Africa. So we believe that if we invest in transforming the agriculture of Africa, we'll be able to feed the whole continent, but also be able to employ the bulk of the population that is growing in the continent with very decent and dignified jobs for everyone. Second one is Light Up and Power Africa. So we cannot do anything in Africa in terms of development if people do not have access to electricity. So this is one of our big priorities in the country. Third one is to industrialize Africa. We know that industrialization promotes better jobs. It positions different countries in better places and so in value chains globally, and that increases the income, productivity, et cetera, in the way creating a virtuous cycle of poverty and inequality reduction. The fourth one, and I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, is to integrate Africa. And I think Natalia already mentioned the AFCFTA, which is something which we believe is one of the first steps for African companies to start internationalize and use the African platform to go ahead and look for new markets. And the fifth one, which I think summarizes very well what we want for Africa, is to improve the quality of life for all Africans. That said, I wanted to talk just slightly about the COVID situation, most in terms of economic and business environment in here. And I just wanted to go a little bit away from everything that we know that it has impact SMEs and families, and it was a catastrophe. But I also wanted to say that Africa, in that sense, has shown a lot of resilience. So different than other countries of the globe, different African countries, even smaller ones like mine, like in Mozambique, we have seen very low recessions compared to other markets in the globe. For example, here in Mozambique, we saw the GDP decrease by just minus 1.3%, much better than most predictions about what was going to happen in the country. So I think this just shows a little bit of resilience of my country and our continent. But maybe just in terms of business, I was just struck on how different African companies were able to emerge and consolidate their spaces amid such a difficult time. So we saw a revolution in the aviation sector. Like Ethiopia emerged as the connector of Africa to the rest of the continent, as anyone did. I think they've never, or at least we barely felt any delays or cancellations of flights, and we felt that we were not disconnected from the rest of the world when several other airlines were facing financial issues. So this is one. I think the second one, which for me is so interesting, like if you look at East Africa and the ability that they have to create the mobile wallets in there, I think it's called the M-Pesa and Cash, Emola, all of them, they were fundamental for several governments like mine in here to pay social protection amid the COVID-19. And this is generating such an interesting trend for financial inclusion, and it opens the door for so many other layers of development interventions that we can do in the country, but also for private sector, right? Right now, we're seeing that more and more people have, as Natalia was saying, a mobile, and that does not just mean that they can transfer money. They can, in fact, sell their things and buy their things for that. And I think this is very powerful. I think there was also some very interesting moving in the banking sector in the region. Some consolidations of operations, rebranding, mergers, acquisitions, which I think is solidifying the banking industry in Africa, particularly here in my region in Southern Africa. And in terms of insurance as well, I think we saw some interesting movements in West Africa. That we haven't seen before, and even in the Northern Africa, we saw some trends of outflow investment. So Maghreb countries were actually investing in Europe, and it was not a speculative investment; it was actually productive. So this is very interesting. And just to put, of course, there are other things as well. But I mean, I think the commodities, especially extractives and energy sector, never really closed in Africa during COVID-19. So it shows that there is a very interesting space for investment in here. In terms of economic relationships with Brazil, and I won't extend myself much more because I think my colleagues really covered everything. So I just wanted to mention a couple that I haven't seen in there, so then I can add some value to the discussion. For sure, I think finance and investment, I think it goes beyond just putting money in there. I think what Brazil has in terms of the banking sector to support Africa is this sort of smart money that we're looking at. And it goes beyond the banking sector. It goes also to private equity, venture capital. I think Africans are very creative. We have several good innovations in here. And I think very recently, the Brazilian ecosystem of innovation and financing innovation has developed in a way that knows, let's put it this way, the pain of being a developing country. And I think this is very applicable to the context here in different African countries. Two things that really strike me about Brazil and Africa is about content creation. And I think this is also about the amount of creativity that connects our two countries. And on that front, I do feel a little bit embarrassed that in Brazil, we do not as much as Africa knows about Brazil. And I think this is, in fact, great because there is a lot of room for partnerships, both for exporting content from both sides. And content, I mean, not just TV, but all the digital medias which are in there and are creating new jobs and in a fast pace, but also on collaborations that could be the cement of this cultural integration that is much needed for stronger business ties. And finally, one of the things that I think is very interesting, and in that front, I do a lot to learn from Africa. And we talk a lot about Brazil, Africa learning from Brazil, but this, I think, is not always around. I think the way that Africa explore in a sustainable way its tourism and natural capital industry is fascinating. Like the way we go to natural parks in here, and we see that it's private sector and everything is sustainable, it's taken care of, and it's bringing in the tourists and is explaining like not just the culture but also the wildlife and the nature behind it and the importance of it is definitely something that Africa has the potential to not just to teach but also to invest in Brazil and bring some very good connections. But you have asked me about what the African Development Bank is doing for Africa, African companies. So I think first of all, we are here to provide finance to those companies, and finance can be done in different ways. I think today what I would like to talk about, because we're talking also about Brazilian companies, is about the capacity for us to lead syndication. So groups of investors that together can put together a big project in Africa, and we are leading a bank on doing that with very interesting interest rates and term as well. So you can check that with us afterwards if you want, for our audience. The other thing that we have been doing beyond that is on building capacity. And building capacity, we have several programs which are in fact developing local content in the different economies in here. For example, in Mozambique, we have just approved a couple of local content programs with the bigger companies, so the leads of the value chain, that we are able to passing through capacity building, advisory services, and business model support to SMEs in the country, the capacity building for them to grow and become much smaller and much bigger companies and providers. So I think this is on the business side. One thing that I think it's important to mention as well is the whole work that the African Development Bank does related to building capacity at the government side, so then they can create a better business environment. So in that front, we have been supporting reforms, not just in terms of macroeconomic stability, which for sure are very interesting, but all the sort of measures that can reduce the red tape of doing business. And I think in that way, it's important because the AFCTA, for example, it has a set of standards that have to be implemented, or even some that still are to be developed. And I think the bank has a leading role on that, because we do understand all the countries in the region. We understand the difficulties that they face, but we also understand quite well the comparative advantage that they have. So I think in that front, we are supporting with advisory services and technical assistance the different governments to harmonize processes, laws, and protocols that can make it easier for African countries to invest and export and import within the region. So I will stop here.
Yes, thanks. Okay, great, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm just looking at Monica here, and I understand I'm put under an immense amount of pressure, given the time that we still have left or don't have left. But I guess, thank you very much. You've made a very brilliant presentation in terms of what the African Development Bank is doing to create that desirable and optimal business ecosystem, right, that can empower business in Africa to be more productive participants with their Brazilian counterparts, right? Now, the question I have for Monica is this. So Romulo has established that, okay, yes, this institutional facilitation exists and is currently being done by developmental financial institutions in the African continent, like the African Development Bank. Also, AfriExim, the African Import-Export Bank in Africa, is doing a similar, very laudable job. So Monica, my question to you is this, right? Historically, the nature of Brazil and African trade, especially Brazilian trade, is trade and partnerships in the sub-Saharan African context, have been, very legacy-oriented. Between the legacy Brazilian companies, has been really limited in areas like, infrastructure, like mining, like energy, right? And, the number of countries has also been quite limited, plus or minus 10. So, for example, we have countries like Nigeria, like South Africa, like Angola, like Ghana, like DCR, like Senegal, like Cape Verde, Benin, and Mauritania. So, this reality depicts that a lot of room still remains for diversification and the expansion of the relationships between African and Brazilian businesses. In your opinion, given the job that developmental financial institutions in Africa are doing to facilitate a greater participation of African businesses, how do you think we can increase the footprint of participation of Brazilian companies in Africa, and how do you think we can diversify their traditional participation and make the same more inclusive? So I apologize, but I'll have to ask you to just, keep the response, short, so we can also just take some questions. But I'm really thankful for your participation. Yeah. I think you're on mute, Monica. I think you're on mute.
Thank you very much, everybody, and I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this talk. And I think we should have assigned us a slot of 3 hours, right? Because there are so many information, so much data on that. And before I will cut down my presentation because in the time, for the sake of time. But one thing that I would like to say is that, and just to reinforce what Natalia Diaz has said, and also what Romulo has said, and is that, actually, the importance, I would like to emphasize the South-South cooperation, to say the countries of the South have contributed to more than half of the world growth in recent years. And inter-South trade is higher than ever. This will be higher than ever, accounting for more than quarter of all the world trade, and outflows of foreign direct investment from the South represent a third of the global flows. And remittances from migrant workers to low and middle income countries reached like $466 billion last year, what helped to lift millions of families out of poverty. So one of the, and I want to, this is what, just to rephrase and to present what actually the UN Secretary has presented recently, but I also want to present a few data on the drivers for Brazilian aid allocation in Africa, and how much does Brazil care, or the African-Brazilian cooperation and collaboration has impacted, and does Brazil care about Africa? And let's mind here that we are talking about Brazil and we are talking about Africa. That is the whole continent of 53 countries, of which Brazil has partnerships, at least with 40 very strong partnerships in terms of aid and collaboration, with 40 of them. I'm not saying in terms of trade, I'm saying in terms of cooperation and the South-South collaboration. Okay, so for example, Africa is definitely the very important, the first recipient region of Brazilian aid, accounting for 64.3% of all the commitment and most of the projects that are leading come out from Brazil. Brazilian development aid, in terms of total number of projects, the share is 14%. So I'm not going to go into the other parts of the world. I just like to say that 64% is the main number, and most of these are large projects, right? If you think of by size, there's 66% of these projects are large size projects. So we have mediums and small size projects as well. And in terms of allocation, I would say, of course, we end up having the highest allocation of our projects in the Portuguese-speaking countries, like Mozambique is, I think, the highest recipient of our aid, like 47%, and then comes followed by São Tomé and Príncipe, Guinea-Bissau, and Cape Verde, and then you go to other countries. And I have to say, for example, Nigeria is a small recipient, but in terms of like how much it receives in terms of aid. But I think that one of the things that were very emphasized here is like what exactly what fields, right? And the share, and if you look at the fields that are have received more a larger allocation, the education and health has been the one that dominates. And actually health, the share in health is being 39.1%. And these are data for the up to 2014, more or less. And then education, and then we see that other areas are kind of being left behind. But primary sector, as Natalia just has said, well, we have to look into the agribusiness, and the agribusiness is still very small percentage, right, of all of this. But then it's like, well, so we have had a lot of relationships, right? So what else can we do, and what else can we learn? And I think the first thing, how do we look at this case, and how do we use it in both for like to learn from each other? And I think Brazil has a lot to learn from Africa. This is a start point for me. It's like, well, it's not the collaboration. Of course, we can collaborate, but how can we learn, and how can we help each other to help the South-South region, right? I think that's a very important point. Is like, well, what are you learning? How you are doing it? How you are dedicating our stance, and what is the main areas of contribution? And I think one thing that has said, I think Romulo emphasized that, basically the institutional strengthening and capacity building is a key aspect in all of this. right? And in all sectors, I think it's independently of, you could say, well, how can we do it in infrastructure, mining, energy? There are key areas for the world to develop. But I think all areas, like how do we provide a system? How do we create a system or build support a structure that actually serves across in a transversal way across all these sector areas that you mentioned? And how do we actually can learn, and how do we emphasize areas that have like more spillover effect? And increase the value chain unfolding, so that we actually multiply and capitalize it at the local level, right? And I think when we're talking about this aspect and the institutional strengthening, it's basically, I think the education and health has been the key sectors, the key points, the key entry points, but also the capacity training in terms of like public sector and exchanging universities, exchanging research and development is very important. And then I would say that this is crucial that we do, and of course, and the other things, like of course, it was as Mr. Mukherjee emphasized, like if you talk in the same language, we talk to the head, but if you talk in the other language, in different language, if you understand, we talk to the head, but if you talk in the same language, we talk to the heart. And I think that's a combination that we have to use more and more, right? To try to understand what is local, and the language is not just like speaking Swahili and Portuguese, but it's speaking what moves us in terms of other language that we can have as a common way to speak, and be it economics or be it like cultural aspects, to tap into our cultural heritage, right? So I would say that we actually, Brazil has a lot to learn, a lot to develop, and more than just invest. And I have to say that probably in the last couple of years, this investment has dropped drastically. I think what we have to do is to share experience and share cases and share opportunities and to talk and within the region, right? And actually incentivize governments to come together and to find global solutions, particularly in terms of like our natural resources. And for example, I think Romulo was very good at bringing the aspects of for example, the tourists and the forest and the use of wild resources. But also I would like to emphasize the use of water, right? Because water is one of the main resources in the world that we take for granted that it's available for all of us. And Brazil has almost 50% of the fresh water in the world, and Africa, as a continent as a whole, has the other important location for water. And we are still not talking that much about how to protect our water sources and how to deal with that, and export water and some of the issues that actually affect infrastructure and energy, how we deal with all the fields that you mentioned, like infrastructure and resource. So the thing for me, sorry, I have to stop, right? So I just
round up, Monica, just real quick, yeah.
Okay, so I will wrap up just saying, like, there is a curse for countries that are very well, right? That they are that we have a lot of resources. We have mineral resources, we have forest resources, natural resources, we have water resources. But I think that we have to work together and how to avoid to cannibalize and to actually not to take advantage of the resources in a productive way to actually to help the whole world, the global economy, right? And it's the global South, the South-South cooperation. I do think that will come. That has to come with a solution to help the global economy. So I will wrap here, and I will open to questions, and I'd love to exchange more ideas with all of you.
Thank you very much, Monica. A very brilliant presentation from you. You really touched on a lot of points, I think something that really struck me in your presentation was the fact of the historicity of African Brazilian aid into African societies. Now, obviously, this only happens within friendly economies, right? And something to kind of tie that with what Masala Diaz said, Africa currently is growing, obviously still dependent, but it's growing beyond the sole dependency on aid to experience a burgeoning, middle-class society, the development of small and medium-sized enterprises, that are driving the developmental trajectory of the continent, in addition to, the roles that, financial institutions of the continent are doing. So I think this was a brilliant discussion for me. And I think it ties very nicely with what CEO Natalia Diaz, had mentioned. I'm wondering if we've got questions from our audience to, we've talked a lot. I first of all have to apologize to the audience. I'm very thankful for your continued participation. We have gone slightly above the allotted time, what we originally said for, the webinar, but I'm very thankful for the audience's continued participation. I wonder if we've got questions just to get things going. I think one question I have, and Natalia, I'll direct this to you if you don't mind, right? My question to you is this, right? We're currently seeing, the rise of, what is termed the ESG framework, right? Economic, social, and governance, investing and business practices amongst enterprises, right? And it has been argued that these practices can help to fill an institutional void that exists in African countries. So, for example, in terms of environmental practices of companies, social practices that create responsible investment, and governance practices that, apart from just expatriating capital, reinvest in the forms of of businesses. So I'm wondering what your perception of this is. How Brazilian companies, for example, in Africa, through increased ESG practices, can contribute more meaningfully to the African ecosystem. I wonder what your and of course, obviously too in Brazil, maybe how African businesses that might invest in Brazilian economy can also, through ESG investing, contribute to the positive development of the region.
Thanks, Bob. This is a really important question, and thanks for who has asked that. So 2 things, if you allow me, I want to do a little bit of an advertisement. So next week, we will be having a 3-day event hosted by Standard Bank and sponsored by Afro Chamber on business opportunities between Brazil and Africa. And there are going to be specific panels on ESG, where we will have the participation of the vice chairman of the New Development Bank and some representatives from the bank and from the market. And we will also be talking to Mr. Marcos Troijo, as well, the CEO of the New Development Bank, on their practices around ESG. So there is going to be a lot of content on that and many more. So I would like just to take the opportunity to invite the whole audience to join us next week. So I think a few things on ESG in Africa. First of all, if you take a look, and we will be releasing, because of the event next week, one article that we have produced in conjunction with Mendonça de Barros associates here in Brazil, that we will speak about the current status of ESG in Africa. And you will see that there is a lot to be done, which is perfectly fine considering the level of developments of the economies. That being said, I think that the positive news are because Africa is a little bit coming late to the game, there is also the positive and the negative aspect. And the positive that I always like to cite or to comment on is really, for instance, in power, right? Power generation. So because now we have technology becoming much more affordable and widespread, Africa is going straight into a distributed model, adopting solar and wind, compared to other matrices like the one in Brazil. So there is a little bit of this opportunity for Africa actually to start engaging in the game under the new rules. This is one side. The other is really, we are now seeing more and more practices related to sustainable finance, green finance, and also ESG or sustainable bonds, right? And we do have an area specifically within the bank to actually engage companies to adopt these practices, and they will have access to cheaper sources of funding. And we have been leading not only sovereign transactions for certain countries like Nigeria, but also for certain corporates in that regard. I think that the question that is posed around ESG is really one that is also important to Brazil. There is a huge pressure coming from the developed nations in that regard, but what about countries that are in the process, or emerging economies that are still in the process of catching up, and how we can kind of catch up under new rules? And I think that there are very interesting solutions that have been being tested by corporates and by the governments that we need to be discussing. I think that the major idea that I saw is really sort of an international fund that would kind of finance the adoption of higher ESG standards in developing nations that could be potentially financed by more developed economies. This is one possibility, but of course there are many others on the table. One very important aspect is that there is not going to be room in the table for countries or corporates that are not ESG aware or that do not include ESG in their corporate strategies, in their medium-term strategy. So it's a debate that is going on right now. And I think that there has been evidence that the more or the higher the governance standards or the social impact of the projects and these projects being environmentally conscious, the higher the chances that you'll be raising cheaper and have more access to funding. And this is going to be one equation that, like ourselves, commercial banks and development banks like the African Development Bank, we'll need to sort of start fostering in a way that we need to provide incentives to governments and to corporates to actually engage in more sustainable types of projects. And I think that we do have a commitment inside Standard Bank. We call this our CEE, which is Sustainability Economic Empowerment. And we definitely drive or direct our decisions towards not only the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, but also we do provide different terms and financing conditions for projects that do meet ESG standards.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Very brilliant discussion there. Really on the importance of ESG and how it's becoming the new rule of the global business arena, really. You know, countries and companies, it's not really a question of choice anymore. And thankfully too, because ESG, investment like we've come to know from the financial perspective, generate higher returns on investment, just by virtue of, more efficient use of resources, by better investment in the workforce, by better governance standards that drive, more compliant, procedures by companies. So it's a good thing, and it's something that both African and Brazilian businesses and societies would have to adopt in going forward in their investment practices. One last question, I'll just direct this really quickly to Monica. Monica, if you don't mind, right? Just to give you a kind of a last shot of this, right? Before we close, I really apologize to our audience. This will be the last question before I pass the microphone over to Mr. Harry Onokuba from the Lagos Business School, who will introduce the next webinar that will be happening on the 29th, to continue this discussion. Because like Monica had said, we need about 3 hours to really trash out the very interesting topics that we're raising in this webinar. So I'll just actually question Monica real quickly, right? Brazil's involvement in Africa is hindered by a lot of factors, right? Because talking about ESG, and a couple of individuals might be saying, ESG, look, there's absolutely no ESG going on in Africa, right? But the truth is, historically, Brazilian investment in Africa, or particularly in Africa, has been hindered majorly by a lack of information, lack of connectivity, and a poor management of expectations, right? How do you think going forward we can begin to influence that, right? To present a more realistic picture of Africa.
Perfect. Lack of information. So a lack of information,
lack of connectivity, and a poor management of expectations. So, for example, in the last case, the durability of investment, the need, the resources that will be required, and things like that. So, how do you think we can, going forward, better interact with those factors?
Well, I think we are actually in a dire time, right? In the sense of, like, for example, some of the Brazilian institutions have been questioned, and particularly this in the current time, what kind of aid or how to intervene. We are in a time that is actually more, let's say, maybe. Should try to looking inward than looking outward, right? But I think you are absolutely right in terms of, like, first of all, we have to know more about Africa, right? And it's a mutual learning that you have to do, but definitely Brazil has known very little in terms. It's not just in terms of business, in terms of, like, culture, history, and the heritage, as I mentioned before, that we have from Africa. So that's one thing, and of course this ends up influencing the lack of connectivity, right? If you don't know the other, if you know the other part, you don't connect with him. You don't know your common roots, your common threats, the common problems, because I think more than anything, we have common issues, how to deal with these things. And then I think that actually, but I don't think it's a lack of will. It's just, and I think the problems that we have to keep building these institutions and keep reinforcing them. We do have a lot of things going on, but the problem, I do think that they have to trickle down more to from the federal level, from the top level of the government and the Itamaraty and the diplomatic field to other tools, because the connections can be done by the local to local, like sisterhood, like cities sisterhood, for example, or states or regions. Because actually, if you talk about Africa, we have, Africa in Brazil, they are very diverse, and we can have more like one-to-one connection instead of like thinking of the whole continent. Like São Paulo can maybe help Lagos, or and Rio can have a connection of Cape Town, or this kind of thing. And I'm talking here about big cities, but maybe we could do it with smaller and incentivize not just like this vertical integration, but like a more horizontally same, right? So I think it can be built, and it's difficult. Right, and it's difficult in a time where you help or some of sustainability, environment sustainability and governance ideals are questioned by federal government, who is actually where most of this relationship has happened. But I think if one of the things that I would think that I would like to see is more like I would like to see governments to incentivize the connections with people that are here, because we have a lot of Africans in Brazil, right? And we have a lot of interest, and we have common interests. And I don't see this happening at the local level or the regional level as much. I'm not saying that there is not, but I think that should be one way to overcome this ignorance. It's like to bring together what actually we already have. Like we have a lot of migrants from Africa here, and of course our whole history. But how do you have to know more about that and maybe educate more?
Yeah, Monica, I'll just jump in here real quick. Thank you very much. I completely agree too. And it's something, we at the Afro Chamber, we've been having these discussions of how can we engender these broader conversations, right? How can we facilitate this greater knowledge, this better learning of the contemporary African realities beyond this, these somewhat outdated, notions of, of Africans that has persisted in Brazil, beyond what I can call their sell-by date, really. I think at this point, I would just jump over quickly to Mr. Harry Onokuba. He's been quiet and been in the background ever since, and I completely apologize. I forgot to introduce him at the beginning, but he's our representative from the Lagos Business School. I think Mr. Onokuba, it's a good time for him actually, though, because I'll hand over the saying of the closing remarks to him, And the blame also too for taking this much time. That's just a joke. But I think I would hand over to him for this last minute to also introduce the follow-up webinar we'll be having on the 29th of September for any of our for all of our audience members that might be interested. Over to you, Mr. Olukoba. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bob. I think you've done a very fantastic job. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the speakers. Thank you, the Honorable Ambassador. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Ramulo, Rui, and Natalia. It's a pleasure being part of this program. This is a collaboration between Lagos Business School, INSPA, Sao Paulo, and of course the Brazilian Africa Chamber of Commerce. And like Bob said, we are going to have a follow-up webinar on the 29th of this month, just 2 weeks away. It's going to be 4 p.m. Nigerian time, which is 12 noon Brazil time, and which is 5 p.m. GMT and 1 p.m. EST. So, and we have lined up some very interesting speakers. So we are going to have the president of the Nigerian Brazil Chamber of Commerce, Chief Alex Okafor, who is going to speak to us. We also have Mr. Francis Anatog, who is the secretary of the Nigerian National Committee on the African Continental Free Trade Zone, Free Trade Agreement, and who is also the senior special assistant to the president of Nigeria on the public sector. And we've also sent an invitation to His Excellency, the Brazilian ambassador to Nigeria. We are still expecting confirmation from that, so we hope he will be able to join us. And maybe one or two from this very distinguished audience will also be called back to share more lights on what we have heard today. I think it's been a very interesting session, and this is just a prelude to what Lagos Business School and INSPA aim to achieve in connecting the dots.
So I think we might have lost you there, Henry. Okay, so the responsibility falls back on me to just wrap this up real quickly. So I think what Henry was trying to say there before we just kind of... Okay, yeah, so you're back. Yeah, so you're back. If you just round up maybe in like 3 minutes, because we lost you for a minute there.
Oh, you lost me. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. That is the challenge of the African technology. Sorry about that. Okay, so we hope to... This will be a prelude to a program between Sao Paulo and Lagos, where we're connecting the dots, the business dots between the two continents. And hopefully by next year, if the pandemic allows us, we are going to have that program running. So once again, I want to thank all the distinguished panelists for your time. And I also like to say thank you to all our audience for their patience. And from here, I think it's been a very wonderful evening and afternoon in Brazil. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you to our distinguished panelists. Thank you to our audience. So until the 29th, where we hope to see you again. It's goodbye from me. I've been the moderator, and the audience has been fantastic. Thank you very much to everybody. See you soon, hopefully. Bye-bye.